Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Touhou Luna Nights. Watch out, there's a Mandragora in this area. Indeed, watch out for them, I'll talk more about them in a second. In the last part we started off the game and got through the starting little onsen bath area at the start of the... I guess I'm gonna call it a castle. It's not exactly the Scarlet Devil Mansion in this case to my knowledge, but I'm also not exactly really super in-depth and knowledgeable about Touhou lore. That's more my partner and some friends deal. Touhou was a series that I've been aware of for quite a while and have played a couple of the mainline games here and again. I think I played like one of the remakes of like 4 or something at one point and all that. I think I played like the 10th or 11th game for a little bit once. But most of my interactions with Touhou is through fan works that were either officially available for purchase like this and Kamaja Remilia, or fan games that are otherwise not available for purchase and are largely more just due to their proximity to other series I play. Like I played Kamaja Remilia in this because of their proximity to Metroid, and I played Mega Mari because, well, at the end of the day, it's ultimately a Mega Man fan game that's just Touhou themed, isn't it? So I mentioned last time that the game brings the pain damage-wise very quickly in general. Level 1 isn't the worst with it. Level 2 is where it can actually be rather startling to the point where you either might want to grind out some money and all that to actually get some upgrades from Nitori, which I don't recommend doing for other reasons, or you're going to want to grind experience from enemies, which there are plenty of enemies near room transitions, so you can easily grind up experience, but I don't do it for this LP too much. I think I do it maybe once or twice, more just for the sake of the flow than anything. In general, in this stage, there's 2 large sources of damage outside of the usual hazard contact damage. These cherubs with the cannons and the mandragores, but I'll talk about them in another moment because time for another new tutorial. The red mist right there, if you come into contact with it, it'll actively stop you from being able to stop time for a few moments. Coming into contact with it actively puts a timer above Sakuya's head that actively grows in its timer length the longer you're in the mist. So if you get in it, get out of it almost immediately. Thankfully, it's not used too often, and it doesn't prevent you from being able to slow down time with the other method of time control Sakuya has by default, but stay away from it all the same. Thankfully, they are very smart with this game's color palette in that a lot of things get grayed out whenever you stop time, but enemies as well as hazards like that always keep their color, which is very, very useful when it comes to helping be able to read things as time has stopped. So, the 2 major sources of damage. There's the cherubs of the cannons and the mandragores. The cherubs of the cannons, pretty straightforward. They take a while for their attack to go off, but get this, it's a cannonball to your face, so even with like mid to late game HP, you're taking a pretty good chunk with that. Same with these chandeliers that fall down from the ceiling. It actively took me until I was editing the footage to realize you can tell which chandeliers will fall or not when time is stopped, because ones that fall still keep their color like that one does, like I mentioned a moment ago. I don't know why, I guess I just never really noticed that because I'm usually more focused on trying to attack the enemies. In this specific set of hallways, I'd really recommend slowing down time in general to give yourself more reaction time. And notably, you can sort of spam the time slow compared to the time stop. Though you can't notably get a full charge of the time slow going while it's active, you need to wait until it ends, but that still allows you to build it up pretty quickly. And over here's our movement utility for this stage. The double jump knife can now double jump. Ineffective in water, not that there's many times you're going to be in water and wanting to double jump anyway. Notably, to do the double jump, she does throw 2 knives downwards, but I believe it doesn't actively eat up MP. With that said, it does count as an attack. So while that's not the most efficient way to actively get knives going, it does get you some extra leeway if you're trying to platform around certain attacks during boss fights and all that. So the mandragores, we saw them at the very start of the stage, and we've seen them in a couple rooms since. They start underground, but if you get too close to them, they come out of the ground and do their trademark mandragora scream. That does ridiculous damage. It's very short range, but in order to actively make them vulnerable to hit, you need to get close to them anyway. With that said, you could just time stop and avoid them outright, which I recommend on a first playthrough, but watch out all the same. Also, a moment ago, we actively got our first knife up. That does what it says on the tin and allows you to throw more knives during time stop. If you actively buy a lot of those from Nitori, you can do a lot of damage during time stop, but it's far from my priority for a couple of reasons. And honestly, even then, I'd rather just get more MP in most cases anyway, because that means I can do more things in general. Especially with subweapons, because notably, and I think I mentioned this last time, the only subweapon that works like knives in general with time stop is the auto aim, because that just spams knives automatically towards your target. Any other subweapon like the stun knife and all that does actively still eat up MP while time is stopped, and if you're spamming that a lot like I like to, you're eating through your MP reserves really quickly. So we actively went through a bit of a detour earlier in this level. We went towards the bottom left of one room to end up on this gigantic route that led to where the double jump knife is. Because if you checked the other doors that was in the room in question, you would find a door that we don't have the colored key for yet, and a platform you cannot reach yet because you don't have the double jump. Specifically, that's toward the top right. The thing with this game's level design is that while it is ultimately a more linear Metroidvania, the levels have enough open doors for you to visit that you actively can explore each one individually, but there really is only one way you can go distinctly in every level to get to the end. It's not like, say, I think the comparison I'm going to go with here is Super Metroid, specifically after you get power bombs, because after that point, there's a couple of different order of operations you can go. You're always going to be playing this game in the same level order with the same exploration no matter what. Which in that regard does make it more of just a Metroidvania in theme and visual styling than in execution, outside of going back to prior levels to grab items with later abilities. So as we make our way back towards the room where I did the split off, worth noting, the room we need to go to towards the top right is perhaps the most dangerous use of Mandragoras in this stage, because it's a very small room, and there are 3 Mandragoras placed in very small proximity up there. So if you just rush into that room willy-nilly up here on the top right, you're probably going to take a lot of damage really quickly, to the point where I think on my practice playthrough and on my first playthrough, I did die here because I just kind of got absent-minded about where I was going. Rushing in this stage, and in this game in general, can very easily get you killed. Worth noting, behind the chandelier in the top of that room, there's actually a time-up item, but we can't get that yet, as it's far too high up for us to actually reach. You might theoretically, I guess, be able to do some sort of damage boost if you're precise, I guess, but honestly, I'd really recommend just waiting until you actively have the ability in question to get it. You're not waiting too long anyway, as it's at the next stage. But even then, I'm going to be waiting a little bit longer, as I don't tend to go back for power-ups in prior stages until towards endgame. So starting from the second half of this stage, we're going to start seeing objects that have glowing auras around them. What those do is they change how that object interacts with you relative to time. The purple aura in specific makes it so that the object with that will move whether time is stopped or not. So now the game becomes, how can you smartly use your time stopping to also make platforming possible at all for you to begin with, let alone easier. They do get actively really smart with this specific type of platforming in this game by the end game, but they do a lot with it very fast, so if you're just trying to rush through it, you might misunderstand a room. So actively make sure you take your time here, because otherwise, well, just look at the spikes beneath you, you're going to take a lot of damage. You do occasionally get moments like that, though, where you just kind of misunderstand a platforming thing really quick. There's also times where, because of the placement of a hazard relative to a platform with one or the other having a purple aura or other aura types, you're just kind of spamming time stop on and off to actively get through safely, and I won't lie, it doesn't exactly feel the best. Over here, though, in this hidden room, which weirdly reminds me of one from the Royal Chapel, I think it was, in Symphony of the Night, we get one of my favorite subweapons in the game, the chainsaw. I remember when I was doing research for this LP, I saw someone say on, I think, GameFAQs specifically, that they did not like the subweapon. I do not get why at all. The way the chainsaw works is that when you use it, you throw it up in an arc, like it's an axe from Castlevania. However, upon making contact, it'll hover on top of an enemy and do consistent damage for a few seconds, and it does a lot of damage relative to its MP cost up there. Hey you, the maid. Freeze or I'll shoot. That voice. It looks like you're having fun. Let me join in. Before I let you join, can I ask why you're here? I came to borrow a book from the library, and I heard Romelia was busy playing, so I'm breaking it instead. Don't worry, Romelia gave me permission. Lady Romelia. She has a big heart for letting a thief like you break in. How rude to call me a thief! I just borrow things, permanently. Taking something without permission is stealing. But good timing. I'll finish you off here. You're the one who's going down. It's gonna be game over. Boss 2 is Touhou series mainstay Marisa, and she's definitely a more complicated boss than Meiling. She has many more attacks, and you need to keep in mind spacing a lot more easily with this on top of the grazing mechanic. She is primarily a projectile fighter, though, as is most characters in this franchise, admittedly. She has a standard 3 projectiles that home in on you. She can also fire them directly at the floor in a spaced out pattern that actively sends out vertical explosions. An attack that she tends to throw out pretty early in, though, that is surprisingly dangerous is this red orb attack she's doing right now and did at the start of the fight. The red orbs themselves are spaced out all over the place, yes, but the main thing is that they actively do generate the time-stopping stopper red mist, so you really need to make sure you avoid that. She can also just outright try to ram you with her broom, which she'll actively go into the background to do to start. Whenever she does that, just duck and you're pretty much going to always be safe. This attack's also kind of rough to dodge, but let's talk about that in a moment. I'm going to go all out. Eat this, Master Spark! So her pinch ability at around half health is a giant laser that tracks onto you. This attack looks dangerous, and it is actively incredibly powerful. It's probably enough to 2 or 3 shot you in most cases. But a simple time stop or time slow pretty much opens up the way to dodge pretty easily because you just need to worm your way around the helix attack on the outer perimeter of it. So the orb attack she does where she generates 6 orbs of various colors. Those will slowly rotate around her, and the way you need to get around them is just either by slowing down time or stopping time and sliding around it. A lot of attacks in this game look pretty complicated to dodge, and honestly, absorbing the pattern at first can definitely be a little bit nerve-wracking. But most attacks are honestly dodged very easily as long as you pay attention to either where they're going or just literally take a moment to literally stop time and figure out where things could potentially go from there. A very helpful thing in this fight is either the stun knife we got last time, because it's just generally good for damage, but also the chainsaw we got a few moments ago, as due to its relatively high in the air arc, it's very easy to hit most airborne bosses with it, sometimes several in a row, to do a lot of damage very quickly. And here's the thing, after the first stage boss, most bosses in this game stay airborne the entire fight, so they're very open to the chainsaw's attack. The stun knife is technically a little better for MP cost use overall, but ultimately, they're still very good in most cases. This wasn't supposed to be like this. You shouldn't be able to use your powers. Really? I don't remember saying anything like that. Ah, damn it. Amelia tricked me. It was too easy on you. You're pretty good for a maid. Precisely because I'm a maid, I take care of my master's enemies with all my might. I told you, I got permission. Whatever, you lost, so please be a good girl and go home. I went easy on you, yet you treat me so coldly. It wouldn't hurt you to bring a cup of tea or coffee. Unfortunately, I can't prepare such things in this fake world. Fine. I'll take a look around this room before leaving. Goodbye. This witch just does whatever she likes. But I wonder what she meant by being tricked. It kind of bugs me. And now that we can go beyond Marisa, we can get our ultimate reward in this stage, the yellow key allowing us to access the 3rd stage in the game, which is actually towards the bottom right of this specific stage map. So let's head on over that way. Oh, hi, Nitori. Nice to see you again. Hello there, how have you been? Nitori, what's wrong? You know, just collecting some jewels. By the way, I brought something good for humans. Take it with gratitude. What is it? It's a shop ticket. With this, you can summon me whenever you want. Even during a boss fight, you can sell jewels or buy items. If I do say so myself, it's a genius invention, don't you think? Yes, you really are persistent. Don't look so annoyed. You must have collected a bunch of jewels by now, right? I think it'll be easier for you if you sell them to me and buy items. What I'm saying is, use me more. Okay, I get it. I will use you again. Oh, no, I'm not going to. I actively compared these shop tickets last time, I believe, to library cards from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and they do serve a very similar purpose. However, easily the biggest buff in the shop ticket's favor is how it actively works. You see, the library cards in Symphony teleport you to the librarian in the long library no matter where you are in either half of that game, which means if you want to get back to wherever you were actively trying to do things, you might be in for a several-minute-long trek. The shop ticket just literally opens up the shop menu no matter where you are, even during a boss fight. And for that matter, it's actively the much more useful item. It's actively pretty good to grab a healing item in case you need one last second from a boss fight almost killing you and things like that, but I'm not using them much in this LP. I think I used that one on accident even later on, but I don't think I buy anything. So right over here, just to the right of that, we actively enter stage 3, the library. You can actively enter this room before finding Marisa or even the double jump knife, but that's because you need the yellow key from past Marisa to get past here, so now we're actively in the main part of the stage. And almost immediately we got these enemies that remind me of the Chupacabra for some reason from the Scooby-Doo movie incarnation specifically for some reason. They're surprisingly dangerous enemies in that they just outwardly dash at you, and that's their main attack, and even with a time slow, they move really quickly. With that said, they don't have the most health, thankfully. I actively almost ended up cutting out a couple of seconds here and again in this LP, by the way, just if I failed to get a soda can in on the first try. But I largely got the soda cans in pretty good time in every single case. There's only really like one or two I think I actively cut to getting the cannon successfully. So, like the prior stages, while this is a relatively open area with which direction you can go in first, you're going to quickly run into a roadblock if you don't go the right way first. Very specifically in the vertical corridor attached to this warp point, there's going to be a branch left and a branch right coming up. If you go right, you're heading towards the end of the stage, but you're going to quickly run into a barrier you're not going to be able to pass. So we need to go left along a, honestly, very long pathway to get the movement upgrade for this stage. Which does get into one of my bigger issues with this game's level design, but I'll talk more about that when I get a moment coming up, because it's time for us to talk about another aura type that objects can have. While the purple aura will make that object move the same way whether time is stopped or not, green aura objects will only move when time is stopped. This is especially where you can have moments where you're just kind of spamming the time stop on and off to make objects get into position, and it really doesn't feel the best, but at the same time it doesn't usually take that long to get it into the right position. There's one specific aura case of this in the next stage that's always just made me kind of laugh, but at the same time it's kind of annoying. Also in this stage we have the relatively unique little drummer boy enemies. The way they work is that their attack doesn't actively do damage, it instead sends notes at you that cause the time stopping mist, which is very redundant feeling to say. So the more of them that are on screen and the longer you get hit by that attack, the less you're going to be able to use the time stop in the room in question. Also, starting from this stage, they're going to start putting auras on enemies. With that said, off the top of my head, I believe they only ever put green and purple auras on enemies. The remaining aura types in the game never get used on them. Probably because there really wouldn't be a really easy way to make that work as like a challenge deal with how the final aura type works that we'll talk about later on. So, one of my big issues with this game's level design comes down to how they place power-ups relative to the level design itself. The long pathways to get power-ups, I do not mind. I just wish there were often faster ways for you to interact with the level design after the fact so you can get back to your main objective. While this isn't the most extreme example, let's use this stage as an example. If I had gone right to start at that fork a few moments ago towards where the boss fight actually is, I wouldn't be able to progress past a certain point, of course, so I'd be going through that level design once. And I have to backtrack through the level design, so that's twice through there, and then once through here to get the power-up, and then I have to go back through it again as we're going to have to see here. What I kind of wish this game had is more of a shortcut mentality, I guess, where there's a way to recontextualize the level design on the way to a power-up, where the power-up in question lets you really shortcut through it, but they unfortunately do not do that. In some regards, it makes each individual stage feel like it's more like 2 levels each, in one case at least 3, because these stages do also get larger as you go through the game, by and large at least. Now, admittedly, backtracking is half of the Metroidvania search action genre, and I am a fan of that largely, but there is something to be said about how you contextualize the backtracking within the game's feel. Like, in Metroid and in Symphony of the Night, for instance, backtracking in that feels more like you're actively finding new routes connecting areas rather than going through the same thing backwards that you just went through forwards. In most cases. There are some cases where that still happens, albeit in much smaller scales. To use Super Metroid as an example, once you actively get the speed booster, what you backtrack through after that as an example of that, let alone technically leaving an area like Crater Ridley in Metroid 1 or Zero Mission. Either way, while I've already used it, let's properly talk about the movement utility upgrade for this stage, the grip knife. What that does is that if you throw knives while the time is stopped, or throw knives and then stop time, you can then jump on them to use as platforms, as long as they're thrown straight horizontally or diagonally downwards from a jump attack. I've always been a little bit iffy with this ability, I won't lie. Not so much because it doesn't work, because it does. It's more how it interplays with the time meters faster draining when you move I've never been the biggest fan of. Mind you, they are at least aware that to the point where most of the time you use the grip knife to get to a higher platform, for instance, or an item like that time up we saw back in stage 2. You're only using it maybe once or twice in a row to get to your destination rather than having to chain like 5, 6, 7 of them in a row. In fact, I don't think the game ever requires you to use it to that exact level. Mind you, in that regard, my issue with the mechanic, I guess, more lies on how the time meter works than with the grip knife itself, as I've always felt the rate at which the time meter drains when you're moving to be a little too fast for what they want you to do with it sometimes. And in that regard, I've always kind of wished that the time ups especially boosted your time meter a little more than they actively do. Which, mind you, again, if you go out of the way to sell the gemstones you get and all that, you can actively buy a lot more time ups and all that to make things go a lot smoother for you. But with how this game goes, you really don't ultimately want to do that too much, if at all, so, It's one of those things that just always feels like it's not fully thought out compared to a lot of the rest of the game, which does ultimately feel very well thought out with how its boss fights especially play out. At this point, though, we're back towards where the warp point is. We just hit the save point back up again, so it's time for us to actively go along the right path back at this fork split, then the left. Also, if you're wondering why I only sped up the last little bit of that backtrack there, it's because I wanted to make sure you knew exactly where the power-up we just got was, because ultimately that could feel a little bit weird. That there is a blue door, but we're not going to be able to open that for a while. Keep that door in mind for later. Hidden wall right here that allows us to get an actual power-up over here as well. Also, meet Frankenstein's creature. They are probably the worst monsters to deal with at this point in the game because they are bizarrely tanky. The stun knife and chainsaw can whittle down their health pretty well, but slowing down time can help you a lot here to make sure you get around their potentially fast jumps. And then here's an MP power-up, but we actively see another power-up here, a knife up, but we need a later stages upgrade to actively access it. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're going to finish up our time here in stage 3. See you guys then.